The bank said I owed $612,000 on a mortgage I never signed. Then I found out my brother Lucas had bought his dream house with my identity, and my parents had helped him do it. The letter had my name on it. Not junk mail. Not a pre-approved credit card offer. My full legal name, Nathan Robert Reed, printed in the clean, dead font of a collections notice, followed by my date of birth, the last 4 digits of my social security number, and a mortgage balance of $612,000. 17 months delinquent. For a property I had never bought. With a lender I had never heard of. I was standing in my kitchen with groceries still in my arms when I read it. A paper bag pressed against my ribs. A carton of eggs tilted dangerously against a sack of oranges. I remember that because my brain chose the eggs as the urgent problem for about 5 seconds, as if cracked shells were the thing that needed saving. I read the notice 3 times before I put the groceries down. There is a strange kind of denial that lives in small actions. If I kept holding the bag, maybe the letter was not real yet. Maybe catastrophe could wait until the milk was in the fridge. It could not. My hands were shaking by the time I called the number on the letterhead. Harborline Home Lending. A representative named Daniel answered with the calm, practiced voice of a man paid to deliver financial ruin without sounding involved in it. He verified my information, then pulled up the file in under a minute. The loan had closed 21 months earlier. 30-year fixed. For 0.5%. 17 months past due. And the property address? I asked. He read it out. 1186, Wrenwood Lane. I knew the address before he finished saying it. That was Lucas's house. My younger brother's house. The one he had moved into with Megan and the kids almost 2 years ago. The one my mother had called exactly what that family needed. The one Lucas had posted on Instagram with his arms around Megan on the front porch, 2 children grinning at their feet, captioned, "Finally ours." I hung up and stood there in my kitchen. The oranges were still on the counter. One had rolled against the sink. I did not move it. For a long time, I could only stare at the letter and understand one thing. My name was already living in a house I had never entered. I need to explain who I was in that family before I explain what I did next. Because without that, a $612,000 mortgage in my name sounds impossible. My name is Nathan Reed. I am 37 years old, the oldest son, and I have been working since I was 15. Grocery stocker, warehouse loader, night shift inventory clerk, payroll assistant, and now payroll compliance supervisor at a mid-sized logistics company called Braddock Freight Systems. I make $74,000 a year. I know exactly what I make because I know exactly what everything costs. Rent, utilities, insurance, gas, groceries. The dental crown I paid off over 11 months because I refused to put it on a credit card. The transmission repair that ate my emergency fund and made me eat sandwiches from home for 6 weeks without telling anyone. Before that letter, my credit score was 806. I built that score the way men like me build anything when nobody is coming to help. Slowly, privately, one on-time payment at a time until reliability stopped being a hope and became a record. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in a building that was clean but tired. The elevator complained every morning. My couch came from a divorced guy on Facebook Marketplace for $60. My curtains hung from a tension rod because I had installed it myself after deciding the drill bits I needed could wait until next month. It was not impressive, but it was mine. Every bill was mine. Every receipt. Every repaired thing. Every quiet Saturday spent comparing insurance quotes instead of buying something I wanted. I had never asked my parents for money. Not once. Not when my car needed work. Not when I got sick. Not when my company delayed bonuses during a bad quarter and I had to stretch ramen, eggs, and black coffee into something resembling adulthood. That was the role I had earned. The stable son. The one who handled things. I did not know my family had translated that into the one whose name could be used without asking. Lucas was 34, my younger brother by 3 years, and the kind of man people forgave before he finished explaining. He was good-looking in a careless way. Easy smile, warm voice. The type who could arrive late, underprepared, owing someone money, and still leave the room with people worrying whether he had been under too much pressure. My parents called him creative. I called him expensive. Not out loud, not then. Lucas had tried sales, real estate leads, freelance marketing, a podcast for 6 weeks, and something involving imported fitness equipment that ended with my father quietly paying a storage bill nobody mentioned again. He married Megan when he was 28. They had 2 kids fast, both sweet, both immediately useful in every family argument. If Lucas missed a payment, it was because the kids needed stability. If Lucas quit a job, it was because he was trying to be present. If Lucas borrowed money, it was an investment in his family's future. When I struggled, I was responsible. When Lucas struggled, he was overwhelmed. That was the difference. He did not create chaos exactly. He created the kind of emergency that made everyone else feel cruel if they did not fix it. I texted Lucas one sentence. Why is my name on your mortgage? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Then disappeared for good. I sat on my second-hand couch holding the phone, staring at the empty space where an answer should have been. For minutes passed. 5, 6. Then my mother called. Not Lucas. My mother. That was the first confirmation. Mom, I said. Nathan, she replied, and her voice already had that careful shape to it. The one she used when she had decided the destination of a conversation before anyone else was allowed to speak. Why is Lucas's mortgage in my name? She sighed. Not shocked. Not confused. Tired. As if I had chosen an inconvenient time to notice my own financial identity had been stolen. Don't start something before you understand the whole situation. I stood up without meaning to. Did you know? Nathan. Did you know? There was a pause. Small. Controlled. Damning. Lucas was desperate, she said. The bank wouldn't approve him a loan. Megan was terrified they would lose the chance at the house, and the kids needed stability. My apartment seemed to shrink around me. So they used my name. We thought it would be temporary. We. That word hit harder than the dollar amount. Who is we? Another pause. Then I heard my father's voice in the background, low and irritated. Put him on speaker. My mother did. My father did not say hello. Your brother has 2 children, he said. He needed a stable home. You have always been good with money. I looked at the collections notice on the coffee table. 17 months delinquent. Dad, I said, that is not an answer. It was paperwork, Nathan. Paperwork. That was what they called a $612,000 debt with my name on it. Paperwork. My father kept talking. That was his way of controlling a room. Volume, certainty, and the assumption that if he sounded disappointed enough, the rest of us would eventually arrange ourselves around him. Your brother has a family, he said. 2 kids who need a roof over their heads. I understand Lucas has kids. No, I don't think you do. That landed exactly where he meant it to. I was 37 years old. No wife. No children. No house with a yard and plastic toys on the porch. Just a 1-bedroom apartment, a job, and bills I paid on time because no one else ever had. You only have yourself to worry about, my father said. Only. That word opened something cold in me. Only myself meant my rent did not matter. My future did not matter. My name, my credit, the 15 years I had spent building a record clean enough to survive emergencies I never asked anyone else to solve. Only myself meant I was useful because I had not needed saving. My mother came back on the line. "We can handle this privately," she said. "You don't need to make it official." "It is official. There is a collections notice in my name." "Then call the bank. Work something out. Lucas and Megan just need time to refinance. They are 17 months behind. They've had a difficult year. So you put it on me?" Silence. Then my father again. "Don't ruin your brother's life over paperwork." I looked around my apartment. The old couch, the cheap curtains, the groceries still half unpacked on the counter. Paperwork. That was what they called my life when it became inconvenient to theirs. "I'll think about it," I said. Then I hung up and did not sleep. The next morning, I drove to the 14th District Police Station at 8:32 a.m. I had slept maybe 40 minutes. Not enough to feel rested. Just enough for my body to keep moving without asking permission from the part of me that wanted to sit on the kitchen floor and stare at the collections notice until it turned into something else. It did not. So I put it in a folder. With it, I brought printed credit reports from Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, 3 months of bank statements showing I had never paid Harborline Home Lending a cent, and screenshots from Lucas's Instagram. There he was. Front porch, Megan beside him, kids grinning at their feet. A welcome mat under the door of 1186, Renwood Lane. Caption, "Finally ours." I parked outside the station and sat in my car for 2 minutes with both hands on the wheel. There are doors you walk through knowing you cannot make yourself unknow what comes after. Then I got out. Officer Elena Ruiz took my report. She was mid-40s, compact, calm, and efficient in a way I appreciated immediately. Sympathy would have cracked me open. Efficiency gave me something to follow. She spread the documents across her desk without drama. "Mortgage in your name," she said. "Yes." "You did not authorize it." "No." "You did not sign closing documents." "No." "You have never lived at this address." "I have never even been inside." She typed for a while. Then she asked the question I had been dreading since the letter arrived. "Who had access to your social security number, date of birth, old forms, tax records, anything that could be used to complete a loan application?" My throat tightened. Because saying it at home would have been an argument. Saying it in a police station made it evidence. "My brother," I said, "and probably my parents." Officer Ruiz looked up for half a second. Not pity. Recognition. Then she said, "That is a hard thing to put on the record." I nodded. It is harder having it done off the record. The case was assigned 2 days later to Detective Warren Pike in the Financial Crimes Unit. He called me at 4:08 p.m. on a Thursday while I was sitting in my car outside Braddock Freight Systems, staring at the steering wheel because going home meant going back to the letter on my kitchen table. "Nathan Reed." "Yes." His voice was low, flat, and careful in the way people sound when they know bad news should not be decorated. "I've reviewed the initial report from Officer Ruiz," he said. "I need you to gather everything. Notices, credit reports, texts, emails, bank records, screenshots, anything connected to the mortgage or your brother's property." "I have some of it already." "Good. Make copies. Keep originals safe. Do not confront them again." I looked through the windshield at people walking to their cars, carrying lunch bags and laptop cases, living inside ordinary Thursdays. My mother already called me. What did she say? I told him. There was a pause. Not surprise. Adjustment. Mr. Reed, he said, I want you to understand what you're describing. Use of your identity without consent, forged signatures on financial documents, loan applications submitted under your name. In this state, that can be felony identity theft. Depending on the evidence and amounts involved, it can carry up to 10 years. 10 years. I wrote it on the back of an old gas receipt because it needed somewhere to exist outside my head. This is going to be uncomfortable, he said. It may permanently fracture your family. I looked at the receipt. Then at my own name printed on the police report beside me. They did that, I said. Not me. Detective Pike was quiet for a moment. Fair enough, he said. The next week felt like living inside two different lives that had been poorly stapled together. In one life, I went to work. I reviewed payroll exceptions, answered compliance questions, corrected a garnishment code, and explained to a supervisor why close enough was not a legal category when people's wages were involved. In the other life, I came home and became a crime scene with a laptop. Detective Pike had told me not to warn them, so I did the strangest thing I have ever done. I acted normal. I called my mother twice. Sure calls, careful calls, the kind where every word feels like stepping across thin ice while the person underneath is pretending there is no lake. She was good at normal. She asked if I had eaten. She told me my father's shoulder was bothering him. She mentioned Lucas's kids had a school fundraiser coming up. Not once did she say mortgage. Not once did she ask whether I had thought about it, because she had recalibrated. If she behaved like nothing had happened, maybe nothing would keep happening. Meanwhile, I pulled all 3 credit reports and went through them line by line at my kitchen table with a yellow highlighter. The mortgage was not the only thing. There was a credit card opened in my name 18 months earlier. Balance, $14,800. Maxed out. Minimum payments missed 3 times, then brought current just often enough to keep the account alive and poisonous. Then I found the car loan. $38,000. Toyota Highlander. Opened 24 months earlier through a lender I had never used, tied to an address I recognized immediately. Renwood Lane. Lucas's driveway. I sat there staring at the line item until the numbers blurred. Not because I did not understand them. Because I did. Mortgage. Credit card. SUV. They had not borrowed my name once in desperation. They had moved into it. Room by room. Payment by payment. Like my financial identity was an empty house they could furnish with their needs. I printed everything. Then I stacked the pages beside the collections notice, clipped them together, and wrote one sentence across the top for Detective Pike. There is more. At work, there are people you trust because they are warm, and people you trust because they are precise. Paula Greer was precise. She was Braddock Freight's in-house counsel, 52, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, the kind of woman who could make a vendor apologize by forwarding them their own contract. I had worked with her for 6 years and had never once heard her ask an unnecessary question. I stepped into her office after lunch and closed the door. I need a consumer protection attorney, I said. Paula looked up from her laptop. For you? Yes. She studied my face for 1 second too long. Then she took a sticky note from her drawer and wrote down a name. Vivian Hart. She handles identity fraud, credit remediation, financial abuse cases, Paula said. If anyone can untangle ugly paper, it's Vivian. Vivian Hart's office was small, quiet, and organized so tightly it felt like even the air had been filed alphabetically. She had spent 21 years in consumer fraud litigation and wore reading glasses on a red chain around her neck. She read everything. The mortgage notice, credit reports, harbor line call notes, Lucas's Instagram screenshots, the credit card, the Highlander loan, my text to Lucas, the calls from my parents. She did not interrupt once. When she finished, she removed her glasses. "This is not family borrowing," she said. "This is identity fraud with multiple financial instruments and coordinated access to personal data." Hearing it stated cleanly did something to me. It made the horror less slippery. "We file an FTC identity theft affidavit today," Vivian said. "Then dispute packets to all 3 bureaus, the mortgage servicer, the auto lender, and the credit card issuer. Detective Pike is already running criminal." "Yes." "Good." She tapped my mother's call notes. "Your family still thinks they can talk you back into silence. They invited me to dinner Saturday." "Go." I stared at her. Vivian almost smiled. "Bring nothing. Promise nothing. Argue as little as possible. Let them explain themselves." "That sounds like a trap." "It is," she said. "You're just not the bait anymore." Saturday dinner was roast chicken. My mother had used the good plates. Not the everyday white ones with gray scratches around the edges, but the blue-rimmed set she kept in the hutch for holidays, guests, and performances that required the appearance of civilization. That told me she understood exactly what the evening was. Not dinner. Staging. Lucas was already at the table when I arrived. He had not answered my text, but there he was, wearing the exhausted, wounded expression that had carried him through most of his adult consequences. Shoulders slightly rounded, eyes soft, mouth set like a man being punished by life rather than exposed by it. Megan stood at the counter, not sitting. That was the first thing I noticed. She kept turning a dish towel in her hands, twisting it once, then smoothing it flat, then twisting it again. She barely looked at me when I came in. My father poured iced tea like this was a normal Saturday. For 20 minutes, we talked about nothing. The kids' school fundraiser, my father's shoulder, a neighbor's fence dispute, the weather, chicken that was slightly dry and nobody said so because everyone in that room had spent years learning which truths were considered rude. Lucas did not mention the mortgage. My parents did not mention the mortgage. I watched them build normal out of silence and serving spoons. Then my mother set down her fork. "We need you to be reasonable, Nathan." There it was. Lucas lowered his head right on cue. "I was going to fix it," he said, voice quiet. "I swear I was. We just needed more time." I looked at him. "More time to do what?" "Refinance." "There is no refinance that cleans up 17 months of delinquency and a mortgage you took out in someone else's name." His eyes filled. "Fast. Too fast. You don't understand what it's like," he said. "Megan and I were drowning. The kids needed stability. I panicked." My father leaned back. "Then don't punish children for an adult mistake." I looked at all of them. "Which adult?" My father put both hands on the table. That was usually when conversations ended in our house. Not because he had won the argument, but because everyone had agreed years ago that his posture counted as a verdict. "Drop the complaint," he said. Lucas wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand. My mother looked down at her plate. "What complaint?" I asked. Nobody answered. That was the moment I knew Vivian had been right. They were not guessing. They had been waiting to see whether I had made it official. My father's jaw tightened. "You call that detective and tell him it was a misunderstanding. A family mistake. Your brother never meant to hurt you. 17 months delinquent is not a misunderstanding. It can still be fixed." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a folded copy of the police report. Then I slid it across the table. It stopped in front of my mother. She looked at it for half a second before touching it, and the way she reached for it told me everything. Not shock, not fear, recognition. Like she had known the shape of this moment before I arrived. It has a case number, I said. So no, it cannot be handled privately anymore. Lucas's tears stopped. Not faded. Stopped. His face went flat for one clean second, all the soft suffering gone, and what was underneath, it was not panic. It was anger. Then he remembered himself and lowered his eyes again. Too late. I had already seen him. And once you see the performance break, you can never believe the act again. The hallway door opened. Megan stepped in from the back of the house, still holding the dish towel she had been twisting all night. For a second, nobody moved. Then Lucas looked at her, and something sharp passed across his face. Not fear exactly. Warning. "Megan," he said. She ignored him. She walked to the table and stood behind the empty chair beside him. Her face looked pale in the dining room light, but not weak. There is a kind of calm people get when they have been afraid for so long that fear finally becomes less useful than truth. "Tell him about the second loan," she said. The room went dead. My father said her name the way he had said mine earlier, like a command. Megan did not look at him. I looked at Lucas. "What second loan?" Lucas's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Megan reached under the chair and lifted a manila folder onto the table. "Home equity line of credit," she said. $265,000. Opened 6 months after the mortgage closed. Also in Nathan's name. My mother shut her eyes. That was not surprise. That was exhaustion from finally hearing the part she had hoped would stay buried. I opened the folder. Applications, bank statements, copies of identification documents I had not provided, signature pages with my name written in a version close enough to fool someone who wanted to be fooled. Then emails. Lucas's email address. A notary service I had never used. A man named Alan Bowers. I turned another page and found a closing disclosure with my forged initials printed beside numbers I had never seen. My hands did not shake. That scared me a little. I looked at Megan. Why now? Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Because he signed my name too, she said, on the insurance paperwork. Lucas stood so fast his chair scraped backward. Megan flinched. I didn't. Not anymore. I closed the folder, kept my hand on top of it, and understood the house was only the first room in the lie. Then I turned the next page. For a second, I did not understand what I was looking at. Not because it was unfamiliar. Because it was too familiar. It was the top half of an old passport application, slightly faded from being scanned badly, with my name, date of birth, social security number, and handwriting filling the boxes in blue ink. My handwriting. 7 years earlier, I had filled that form out at my parents' kitchen table because my printer had died the night before an appointment. My mother had made coffee. My father had complained that government forms were designed by people who hated citizens. I had saved the file to their desktop, printed it, checked the pages, and left without thinking twice. Because you do not think twice about leaving a form on your parents' computer. You do not think they are storing your handwriting like ammunition. I stared at the scan until the room around it began to blur. The forged signatures suddenly made sense. The rhythm was wrong, the pressure was wrong, but the shape had been practiced from something real. They had not guessed my information. They had not found one old form by accident. Someone had kept it. Someone had supplied it. I looked at my mother. She did not look shocked. She looked tired. That was worse. Her eyes moved down and left, away from me, away from the folder, away from the exact point where motherhood became participation. "You had this," I said. She pressed her lips together. "Nathan, you had my passport application. It was on the computer. 7 years ago." She flinched at that. "Not much. Enough." Lucas said, "It wasn't like that." I did not look at him. This was not his moment anymore. This was hers. My mother, who used to remind me to shred bank offers. My mother, who told me not to put my social security number on forms unless I had to. My mother, who had watched me become careful because nobody had ever left me room to be careless. She had not made a mistake. She had opened a drawer inside my life and handed Lucas the key. That was when I stopped thinking of it as desperation. Desperation is messy. This had been organized. I stood up with the folder in my hand. Nobody moved at first. That was how I knew they had all imagined some other ending to the dinner. One where I broke down. One where I agreed to handle it privately. One where the stable son carried the weight because he always had. My father reached the hallway before I did. He planted himself there, one hand against the doorframe. Blocking the way like authority was still something his body could enforce. "If you walk out with those papers," he said, "you will destroy this family." I looked at him for a long moment. Not because I did not know what to say. Because I wanted to remember him clearly. The man who had taught me to change a tire. The man who had told me a handshake mattered. The man who had looked at a felony committed against his oldest son and called it paperwork. "You destroyed it," I said. His face tightened. "When you decided which son was allowed to matter." Behind him, my mother made a sound. Small. Wounded. I did not turn toward it. For once in my life, I did not manage the room for her. I stepped around my father. He did not stop me. Maybe he finally understood that whatever power he had used on me growing up had expired somewhere between the police report and my mother's saved passport scan. Outside, I sat in my car with the folder on my lap and breathed for 45 seconds. Then I blocked every number and called Detective Pike. The next 3 weeks did not feel like justice. They felt like paperwork trying to kill me slowly. Not dramatic paperwork. Not the kind people imagine when they say they want to fight back. I mean certified mail receipts, scanned statements, fraud affidavits, call reference numbers, passwords changed, accounts frozen, follow-up emails, duplicate forms because one department used a different portal than another department owned by the same company. I went to work because rent still existed. Then I came home and turned my kitchen table into a command center for the theft of my own name. Vivian filed the FTC identity theft affidavit. Detective Pike's team pulled bank records. Harborline Home Lending sent me copies of closing documents that made my stomach clench because there was my signature or something wearing its skin, sitting under loan terms I had never agreed to. The forensic document examiner was named Leonard Sable. 49 pages. That was how long it took a stranger to explain, professionally and without emotion, that my own name had been forged. Sable compared the mortgage application, the Hellick paperwork, the Highlander loan, and the credit card documents against known exemplars from my employment files, passport paperwork, tax records, and bank forms. His conclusion was clean. The signatures were inconsistent with mine in rhythm, pressure, spacing, entry stroke, and terminal stroke. That phrase stayed with me. Terminal stroke. There was something almost poetic about it, in the coldest possible way. The end of a signature. The last movement of a name. Mine had been copied, but not known. That mattered more than I expected. Megan became part of the case when Sable flagged a second forged signature. Not mine. Hers. Lucas had signed her name on an insurance document connected to the Highlander loan, listing coverage she said she had never approved. Detective Pike asked her to come in voluntarily. She did. With a lawyer. That was when I understood she was not just scared anymore. She was choosing a side. I did not trust her. Not fully. But I knew the difference between someone asking to be forgiven and someone handing over evidence before anyone promised forgiveness was possible. Megan's attorney was named Michael Tran. I met him once in a hallway outside Detective Pike's office. He was small, sharp, and carried himself like a man who had learned early that volume was a poor substitute for leverage. He did not ask me to forgive Megan. I respected that. 3 days later, Megan signed a cooperation agreement. Her statement was 70 pages. 70 pages of dates, bank calls, text messages, passwords Lucas had asked for, envelopes her mother-in-law had brought over, and the exact moment she realized the house was not just built on lies, but financed through one. She named Lucas. She named my mother. And she named Alan Bowers. Bowers was the notary whose stamp appeared on the mortgage documents, the Hellick paperwork, and 2 forms connected to the Highlander loan. According to Megan, Lucas had met him through a documentation service that handled inconvenient signatures for a flat fee. $500 a stamp. That was the price someone had put on my name. Detective Pike later told me Bowers had notarized 9 fraudulent documents over 4 years, not all connected to my family. Mine was just the file that finally pulled enough thread loose. He was arrested on a Thursday morning outside his office. 48 hours later, he was cooperating. People like that always do. They act like gatekeepers until a prosecutor explains the size of the gate closing behind them. Bowers gave up emails, payment logs, copies of IDs, a scanned folder labeled Reed/Nathan. I hated that most. Not the fraud. The organization. My name had become a file category in someone else's business. By then, this was no longer only Lucas needing a house. It was a network. And my family had walked me straight into it. Vivian called me on a Friday afternoon and told me to sit down. I was already sitting. By then, sitting had become what I did between calls, forms, and the kind of emails that begin with "Thank you for your patience," right before asking you to prove your own existence again. The DA filed charges, she said. I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved. Because I needed 1 second where my face did not have to know what to do. Lucas Reed, Vivian said, identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, and fraud by inducement connected to the mortgage, Hellick, auto loan, and credit card. I wrote his name on my legal pad. Then stopped, because I already knew how to spell it. Your parents are charged with conspiracy to commit identity theft and accessory after the fact. My hand tightened around the pen. What about Bowers? Alan Bowers is facing multiple counts of notary fraud, false acknowledgement, and conspiracy. His cooperation is already being used. I looked around my apartment. Same table, same cheap curtains, same stack of documents that had slowly replaced normal objects in my life. There were no sirens, no dramatic knock at the door, just Vivian's voice through my phone, turning betrayal into charges. Okay, I said. Nathan. Yeah. You don't have to be okay yet. I know. I did not, actually, but I was learning. The credit remediation was less satisfying than the charges. No one warns you that clearing your name from fraud requires you to repeat the fraud out loud to strangers who keep asking for another copy of what you already sent. Vivian filed the FTC identity theft affidavit and sent dispute packets by certified mail to Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Then came Harborline Home Lending, the Helix servicer, the Highlander lender, and the credit card issuer. Every packet had police reports, Sable's forensic report, court filings, my bank records, proof of address, and sworn statements. Harborline resisted first. Their fraud department said they could not remove the delinquency without further legal authorization. Vivian was silent for 3 seconds. Then she said, "They always say that before they receive the order." 2 weeks later, she had won. Harborline changed its tone. So did everyone else. Not quickly. Not kindly. But officially. For the first time in months, the paper started moving in my direction. The morning my credit report updated, I was sitting at the same kitchen table where I had first spread the evidence out like wreckage. Laptop open. Coffee untouched. One hand on the trackpad. The other resting flat on the table because I had learned, over the past months, that good news could make me shake almost as badly as bad news. I refreshed the page once. Nothing. Again. Nothing. On the third refresh, the number changed. 497 became 772. I stared at it. Not 806. Not yet. But close enough that my chest opened in a way I had almost forgotten bodies could do. The mortgage delinquency was gone. The Helix dispute had been marked resolved. The Highlander loan no longer sat on my report like a car parked across my future. I sat there for a long time, looking at the number. It was just a credit score. Except it was not. It was my name beginning to come back to me. Most people think the courtroom is where justice becomes dramatic. It is not. Courtroom 7 smelled like old carpet, printer toner, and coffee that had been sitting too long. The lights were too bright. The benches were too hard. Nobody looked like the version of themselves they probably imagined when they rehearsed the day in their heads. I arrived at 9:10 a.m. in a gray blazer I had owned for 9 years. The same one I wore to my interview at Braddock Freight. I had my phone, my wallet, a copy of my victim impact statement, and a coffee from the cart downstairs that I never drank. My parents were across the hallway. I knew they were there before I looked. Family has a gravity even after you stop orbiting it. My mother looked smaller. My father looked older. Lucas sat between them with his lawyer, staring at the floor like the floor might offer him a version of events where he had only made mistakes and not choices. I did not speak to them. There was nothing they could say that would give me back the nights I spent proving I was not responsible for debts I never created. Inside, when the judge asked whether I wished to make a statement, I stood. My hands were steady. That surprised me. My name, I said, was the only thing I owned completely. The courtroom went very quiet. My credit, my history, my signature, my financial identity. I built those things over 15 years without help because I was the son in this family who was not allowed to need help. I did not look back at my parents. They used my name because they knew I would be good for it. They used it because I had spent my life being responsible enough to survive damage. And they assumed that love meant I would absorb the damage quietly. My voice did not break. I was proud of that later. Love without accountability is just permission to keep hurting someone. I am here because I no longer give that permission. When I sat down, Vivian put one hand briefly on my forearm. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Lucas was supposed to speak after me. That had been the plan, according to Vivian. His attorney had prepared something careful. Remorse without admission. Responsibility without detail. The kind of statement that says harm happened while avoiding the sentence I did this. I watched him stand. For a second, he looked like the Lucas I had grown up with. The boy who broke things and then stared at them with wide eyes until someone else found a broom. The man who could turn consequences into weather and wait for the family to bring him an umbrella. Then his attorney leaned in. He whispered something. Lucas's face changed. Not pale. White. The color of printer paper. The color of a credit report. The color of my name on documents I had never signed. I found out later what had happened. Megan's cooperation agreement had been supplemented that morning with emails pulled from Alan Bowers's file. One chain had been forwarded from my mother's account to Lucas. Attached were scans of my old passport application, 2 years of my tax returns, and a utility bill from my apartment. Underneath, my mother had written one sentence. Use whatever you need. Just don't let him find out. That was the sentence that did it. Not because it surprised me. Because it made denial useless. Lucas looked back once. Not at me. At our mother. She had one hand pressed to her mouth. My father stared straight ahead. Lucas turned back to the judge. His attorney whispered again, sharper this time. For once, my brother did not have enough room to perform. He gripped the podium with both hands. Then he said, I plead guilty. 3 words. No tears. No explanation. Just the truth, arriving late and dressed like a sentence. 8 months later, Lucas received 24 months of probation, 240 hours of community service, and a restitution order of $910,000. People hear that number and think it means I got paid. That is not how restitution works. It means the court wrote down, officially, the size of what he helped destroy. Mortgage damage, helic exposure, credit card charges, auto loan fraud, legal fees, administrative costs. Months of my life converted into a figure because the system needs numbers where pain does not fit. Megan separated from him before sentencing. She moved with the kids into a rental near her sister. I only know that because her attorney sent Vivian an updated address for paperwork. I did not ask for more. My parents received 12 months of probation each and a joint fine of $52,000. My father retired early. My mother stopped volunteering at church finance committee meetings, which someone told me in the careful tone people use when they want gossip to sound like concern. Alan Bowers lost his notary license permanently. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of notary fraud and false acknowledgement, received 18 months probation, and was barred from handling notarized documents in the state again. That part mattered to me more than I expected. Not because it fixed anything. Because a man who had treated signatures like a side business was no longer allowed near anyone else's name with a stamp. Lucas wrote a letter before sentencing. I read the first line. I never meant for it to go this far. Then I stopped. That was the problem with my family. They never meant for consequences to arrive. Only the benefits. My credit score is 811 now. I checked it 3 times the morning it updated, not because I did not believe the number, but because part of me still expected someone else's debt to come crawling back under my name when I looked away. It did not. 6 months after sentencing, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of town. Not luxury. I am still the kind of man who notices parking fees and reads utility estimates before signing anything. But the building is nice. Not clean but tired nice. Actually nice. The elevator is quiet. The hallway lights do not flicker. The kitchen has enough counter space for groceries, mail, and a laptop without everything touching like evidence. The curtains are real curtains. That sounds small unless you have lived for years with fabric hanging from a tension rod you installed badly, because paying someone felt irresponsible. These are proper curtains, on a proper rod, installed by a man named Kevin who charged too much and did the job correctly. I paid him. I did not apologize to myself for paying him. The second bedroom is my office. Desk by the window. file cabinet against the wall. One shelf for documents I still have to keep, another for books I bought because I wanted them, not because I needed to learn how to survive something. My mother left a voicemail 3 months ago. I have not listened to it. I have not deleted it either. I do not know what that means yet. Megan sent a card. No long explanation. No request for forgiveness. Just, I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. Thank you for still letting the truth matter. I wrote back one sentence. Thank you for the folder. I still think about the passport application. Not every day, but sometimes, usually when I am filling out something ordinary, a medical form or a lease renewal or a benefits document at work, I pause before writing my social security number and remember that afternoon at my parents' kitchen table. 7 years ago. Their printer worked. Mine did not. That was all it took. I remember my mother asking if I wanted coffee. My father complaining about how many pages the government needed for one document. Me saving the file to their desktop, printing it, checking the boxes, and leaving without deleting anything because I trusted the house I grew up in to hold something small and mine without turning it into a weapon. That is the part people do not understand about betrayal. It rarely starts with the big thing. It starts with a door you never thought you had to lock. I do not hate my family now. Hate would require more daily attention than I am willing to give them. What I have is clarity. I understand the terms of the relationship I had been living inside my whole life without reading the contract. The condition was simple. I could belong as long as I stayed useful, quiet, and willing to absorb whatever damage kept everyone else comfortable. The stable son. The one who handled things. The one who only had himself. They were right about one thing. I did have myself. And once I finally chose him, I stopped being theirs to use. That is the only part of this story I do not regret.